And I'm just really looking forward to hearing your journey. Maybe we can start from the beginning, as I always start. Every story has a beginning. So let's start
Very
there. Where
true.
you discovered this passion.
Okay, so writing was always a passion and hobby that I had in the background since high school.
Mhm.
So I just did it randomly, did a lot of creative stuff, personal reflections. Then when I went to college and university, I wrote for the student newspapers, did a lot of analysis, movie reviews, so kept that creative energy flowing.
Mhm.
And then there was a time when I was in between jobs, I think early 2014.
Mhm.
I was in between jobs, so I was like, okay, let me see what else I can do to provide myself some other income and sustain myself. And then I turned to writing, was inspired to fill a niche that seemed to be lacking, and it just took off from there.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about that niche.
Okay.
Maybe you can tell me a little bit about it.
Right. So if you look at the cinematic cinematic environment in Hollywood, if that's the right word, um, at the time it was very monotone. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of community-based stories. I don't want to say marginalized because that, to me, is a term that's invalid. But
Mhm.
community-based stories that were not brought to the big screen. So we had a movie called Gods of Egypt. I don't know whether you've heard about it.
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay, so it's a movie about the gods of Egypt, and there's only one African god, right? The rest are played by Caucasian European actors,
Mhm.
which to me was very unnerving, and that's actually what enabled me to inspire me to write the book Shadow Walkers,
Mhm.
which focuses predominantly on African mythology, ancient kingdoms of Africa, portraying the gods and pre-colonial cultural legends of Africa as gods who've centered around the world. And through this story, you learn about their different history, their cultural legends, the things they accomplished, and as well as the ancient kingdoms of Africa and real life cultural heroes.
Right. So I do understand that your niche also is comics in terms of content as well, and as how you put forward your work is in terms of illustration,
Yes.
um, which I really like. You know, growing up, we were in Kenya, we were looking at Juha Kalulu and the Shujas, and I think those are the pretty popular ones. Before we get to that
Right.
market and see how you've conquered that market, let's just begin with your books. So you've already talked about Shadow Workers. I know you have 4 books
Yes.
out. Can you talk a little bit about each book?
All right. So Shadow Walkers was my first book. Well, one of the ones that I'm really proud of because it helped launch me into the space. My second book is called Spruce Avenue. It's a generational crime story, and it's set in any town, America, but it does um, have relevance to communities of color because if you look at the environment in the U.S., people of color are targeted unjustly in terms of crime. But then you have to look at what are the precipitating factors of crime, and people look at crime as just being a thing that happens in an instant, but there are generational factors. So this story explores the generational factors from sides of the youth and sides of the older generation. So the protagonist, um, who starts out as Billy Drake, is a aspiring athlete, but he gets mixed up in the wrong crowd. He gets confused by the allure of crime life. So a tragedy occurs that causes him to reform his ways, but also causes him his aspiring sports career. So he ends up becoming involved in law enforcement as part of his reform. And 20 years down the road, he becomes the town sheriff or sergeant, right? But because of the incident that occurred, he's estranged from his oldest daughter, who herself has become a criminal, and they have a bone to pick. So 20 years later, they have a reckoning, and generational secrets come out, and they're able to confront the generational factors that have led to them being where they are in their lives. And that speaks to communities of color and the reality of society in America.
Mm-hmm. Um, I am sensing that you are writing about Africa mixed with Americans. Uh, so my question would be, did you grow up in the States or in Kenya? Or how did that influence come about?
Uh, right. Okay. So I grew up in Kenya, but I did have some developmental experiences in Canada, where you do see racism. It's not obviously as violent or physically manifest as in the US, but they have a lot more structural and systemic racism in Canada. So it's very insidious, but it's still very potent and still very present in Canada. And that's some of what this speaks to as well. So that
Mm.
influenced the way in which I wrote the book.
All right. I see you're causing awareness on a very serious topic, which I really like pushing awareness and trying to change the society with the messages that are underpinned in your comics. But I like to ask something fun. And
Sure.
how do you come up with your hero outfits? Because I've just seen this video of you on CNN and you're donned in a
Okay.
very nice attire, and I'm like, oh, how do you come up with them?
Okay, so it wasn't me. The artist, Point Blank Vumbi, was very inspired when he was creating the characters from the comic, and he drew a lot from history and um, cultural identities, right?
Mhm.
So I approached a few local designers, and they were able to design the costumes for me. And part of it was providing another foundation to buy into local comic culture, because if you look at American comic culture, whenever you go to these conventions, you have people that dress up as their favorite superheroes, whether it's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. There's a whole list of names, right?
Yeah.
So you want to also have that same energy and that same representation tie into the local comics, and you can't expect someone to do it if you're not willing to do it yourself. So that's what propelled me to take that on.
Okay, which brings us to our question. Tell me a little bit more about the comic culture in Kenya and the market itself, how you've penetrated it and how your books are doing.
So the culture is very strong. It has a very big following for both international and local content,
Mhm.
um, because it is a formative tool and an agent of representation for obviously local communities. They do want to see local stories, local characters. So that's a big demand. So that's one thing that I myself, along with several other comic artists, are looking to provide. We have Avanda Studios. We have Chief Nyamwea with Freehand Studios. Point Blank Ivumbi, which I mentioned. There's also Moritz. So quite a few who are doing the work and bringing local stories to life. Part of the inspiration was, for me personally, was the late Frank Odie, who did the comic Akohan, which was something ahead of its time because it's very strong in the culture, very strong in history, but then also buys into the mantra of comics. You have a lot of action, a lot of conflict, but just providing strong comics in an African context.
I've heard you mention a couple of companies, sorry, not organizations. Are they in any way linked to publishing comics, or are you self-published? Did you begin like a company to publish yourself, or how have you published your book?
Right. So I am self-published as well as most of the local artists. We are still a growing industry, but we are looking to get corporates to buy into it, and the market is proving itself. If you are familiar with the two comic convention companies, we have Nikon and we also have Movie Jabber, and these are two very strong comic convention companies that have created a wonderful space for the community, for the fans, and for corporates to engage with the comic culture and help sustain it and help it grow.
All right, that's very interesting. Could you? I'm glad that the comics, particularly sector industry, is really growing in Kenya, and I've heard you self-published and you're working with other people. How are you selling your comics?
So currently, I do sell through several partners. My comics are available in Nuria Bookstore, based in available at the Nuria Bookstore
Mhm,
in Nairobi.
mhm,
They're very well recognized and respected bookstore. I am looking to work with some publishers and partners in Canada. So we have Kaya Publishing
mhm,
that I'm looking to get my comics and books over there very shortly. And then just branching out, we have Maktaba Studios, who I also partner with. They are a very good distributor for people who are looking to buy things digitally.
mhm.
So as many mediums as I can. Just want to make sure that I connect to the market and the audience authentically, right? Yes.
Mhm. Yes, I was going to ask you if you also sell it digitally, and I've heard you mention it. That's really good. Maybe one other thing I could ask is, are you looking into developing them into animations or something?
Yes, that's definitely next on my list. So my creative model now is whenever I come up with a story and the story works as a novel or a short story, I look to see how it can first be translated into comic that provides proof of comic concept, and then you're able to test the market, see the viability, see the response, and then obviously the next step now is to turn to animation. Currently within the creative market, whether you look at Netflix or you look at Amazon, all the well-doing and fast-growing creative properties have come from indie comics. So if you look at Invincible, if you look at there was Invincible. There was another comic I've forgotten. It's just the Walking Dead. So that's based off of a comic.
Mm,
There's two others that have just slipped my mind, but if they do come back, I'll mention them.
yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you what you would, if for someone who is interested in pursuing um, this kind of writing, what kind of skills do you need to write, or do you also need to be an illustrator? And how do you get into it?
Okay. So you don't need to necessarily be a jack of all trades. So I myself, I'm just a story creator, but there are people and there are artists out there who are willing to collaborate with you if your story has value, it has merit, and you are dedicated to producing something of quality, right? And you're not just in it to make a quick income. You're looking to help build something, right? So there's several artists out there you can work with. I've partnered with quite a few. The main thing is to have strong characters that actually accurately represent either the cultural history or, if you're doing a modern contemporary story, represents the environment on the ground, right? So you can't, for example, do a story about Nairobi if you're not conversant with how Nairobi streets operate, if you're not conversant with Matatu culture, if you're not conversant with discussions that are currently ongoing, right? Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would also take that as advice to any writer, like do your research and know what you're getting into before writing a story. So are you saying before you write a book, you think about the whole plot before the characters, or is it do you think of a character and then that character inspires a story?
It's a bit of both. So you do want to have a holistically complete world as much as possible, but as a writer, you're also testing your ideas. So a lot of my novels have come from blog posts that I've done.
Mhm.
So I will come up with a short story, try to make it as character driven as possible, put it out there, and see what the public response is to that particular short story. And then with the feedback you get, you can see what the public audience connected with, what they liked the most, how they found the characters. And from that, it gives you additional insights and an extra roadmap to building now a greater world for your story, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I like the fact that you've mentioned your blog. I've had a look at it. Good, really good. Um, are you a full-time writer? Apart from your books, what else do you do? Or are you a full-time writer?
I am a full-time writer, so I do my own personal writing. I also do a lot of copy and content creation for third parties. And then I am doubling when the opportunity becomes available to double in front of the camera as well as behind the camera. So I'm engaged in a lot of uh, acting locally
Mhm.
whenever the opportunity presents itself, as well as being behind the camera, whether it's directing or script writing.
Oh, all right. Um,
Yes.
what would you term is as literary success to you? That place where you're like, yes, I've made it as a writer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Literary success would be recognizing when you've created a loyal fan base that has um, found your books to be something of value, and which is why I'm so big into these local conventions, because you're able to meet the audience and have a honest connection with them and find you've given them something of value and they're willing to reciprocate. Obviously everyone wants to be on the big stage, like get on the Netflixes, get on the Hollywood screens, but it's a long journey before you get to that level. And if you don't make it locally first, then you'll never get to that level. So my priority is always first and foremost to engage with the local community, engage with other local artists, and achieve a level of mutual success, right? Because you don't want to leave people behind per se. Yes.
Um, just tell me a little bit about the conventions. How many are they in a year here in Kenya, and what goes on there?
Okay. Right. So we usually have about 3 or 4 conventions a year, done split between 2 companies. Uh, Movie Jabber focuses both on specifically anime. So there's a lot of love for Korean and Japanese artwork that's captured in the manga conventions. And then they do a larger, all encompassing convention, which is known as Movie Jabber, in December. Then we have Nikon, which is the first comic convention coming in Kenya. They have an entire weekend convention, which is actually happening this coming weekend on November 19th and 20th. That will be at Sarit Center. 2-day event. They engage a lot of international artists, a lot of international counterparts, and try as much to be a bridge both for local creative communities, local audiences, and international audiences as well.
Oh, amazing, amazing.
Yes.
What is that one advice that you were given? And what advice would you give either another comic writer or just a writer or just someone looking to write?
The one advice I was given is, and it's 3 pieces of advice in one. Don't stop writing, because you have to make people believe before they believe, right?
Mhm.
So if you give up before your books have had a chance to your books or work have had a chance to gain traction, then you're selling yourself short. If you look at Game of Thrones was written 15, 20 years ago, and it just became a worldwide sensation within the last decade, right? But he wrote it, I think, close to 20 years ago.
Mm,
If you look at what we're seeing from Kenyan audiences now appearing on Netflix and so on, you have these people who have been acting and being on the scene for, again, 15, 20 years before they got to the international stage.
mm,
So don't expect fly by night success. The second part of that is you have to write for yourself as well as write for the audience, because if you want your book to be a success, it has to have an authentic voice. And
mm,
people buy your character as much as they buy your book,
mm,
which is why conventions are big selling points, right?
mm,
No one is going to buy your book if you're not representing yourself authentically. You're not representing the story authentically. So you have to write in your own voice to really create a good piece of work.
mm,
But then you also have to recognize what the audience is looking for. And
mm,
again, that's why indie comics are so popular, right?
mm. Yes.
Because you have The Boys, which was a big success. You have Arcane on Netflix, which was a big success as well. You have the South American animation Tresse, which was also a big success. It ties into South American mythology as well.
Yes. For how many years have you been writing, and how long did it take you to roughly write each book?
Okay. I've been writing professionally since 2014.
Mhm,
So going on formally, so that's going now on close to 8 years. Um, each book has taken about a year and a half now. Some of the books I had written within an amateurish atmosphere.
mhm,
And over the last couple of years, I've looked at some of my first pieces of writing. And again, going back to the authentic voice, I reworked them into a larger contemporary novel. For example, Spruce Avenue is one of them. It stemmed from a short story I did in 2004, right?
yeah.
So it stemmed from a short story I did in 2004, and then brushed it off and really reworked it and made it the fantastic novel it is today.
Mhm,
There was also my novel Shadows in the Twilight. It was a amateur play, or originally an amateur play that I did for a writing assignment back in 2001, 2002.
mhm.
And then I brushed it off over the last 2 years, reworked it, and then made it something for the current contemporary space.
What would you say have been your lows and your highs throughout so far in your writing career?
Lows and highs is finding the right audience, right? Because sometimes, this comes into the business side of things, that you have to identify where your audience is, right? You cannot just write a book for everyone. You have to really test your material and see if it's the right time. No matter how much might be a passion project, there's a couple of things that are put on the back burner, just because it's not time yet, or I feel that particular audience hasn't developed right, or you have to find the right way to bring it to the market. So um, highs and lows is not being able to put everything I want or everything I've already created out into the market, because again, finding the right audience and it might not be the time. Uh, the lows is sorry, the positives of the highs is starting to connect with an international network, right? Uh, because we are a global community, and when you're writing for people of color, writing for um, fringe communities are on the fringe of the artistic space, even though they're not the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
The global network is a huge priority, and speaking to the global majority as well. So that's something that I'm starting to do, and I'm starting to connect with people from all corners of the world and help create a global art space.
And that's the one thing I really love about comics. They have a universal feel. They have a universal reach. You know, like I'm also a fan of Japanese anime, and when I watch them,
Yes,
I don't feel any divine. So yeah,
right.
I get you. Uh, if you were given a chance to meet um, an author or someone that inspires you out there, who would it be and why?
Locally, Meja Mwangi, because he's such a prolific writer. He's written stories that cut across the Kenyan cultural space, and he recognizes the contemporary shift that has happened in modern culture, right? And we are still having within African spaces culture clash between modernity and traditionalism, and that's where a lot of his work is centered. And he's able to bring out such vivid characters, which is one thing I've tried to focus on as well, is the characterization. So he's very good at that, and very good at giving them a visual landscape. So that would be the local author I'd want to meet and have an in-depth conversation with. He also cuts across the board, so he appeals to Kenyans as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
The international author I would love to meet is Sidney Sheldon and John Grisham, just because of their strong, again, visualization and characterization. And John Grisham has been able to take something that's seen as very mundane and very tedious, the law profession, and he's turned it into this wonderful tapestry where he's looked at different different perspectives. So you look at perspectives of the lawyers, you look at the perspectives of the clients, look at the perspectives of the judges, and then obviously the everyday people caught up in the legal system and how they interact. And he's made quite a name for himself that way.
Um, I like I like the words that you use, you know, tapestry and all those
Yeah.
words. They're very descriptive and very nice to listen to, as if I'm reading your
Yes.
book already. Um, but what does your future look like?
My future. I think that's a very good question. Like I haven't really set a definite trajectory. I haven't written anything in stone. I know I am going to still keep writing, still trying to tell the fringe and untold story, be as much community serving in my writing. Obviously, I do want it's everyone's dream to get onto the global stage, but I want to get onto the global stage for the right story.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of production, I do believe that at the very minimum, I want to produce another 5 to 10 books. And then with Shadow Walkers being a 20 chapter novel, I want to finish the 20 issue series with the artist. So we're now 2 issues in.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 18, 19 chapters to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I want that to be released as a full novel, and then complete the second and third novels. So Shadow Walkers is supposed to be a trilogy. So right now we're just producing the comics from the first novel of the trilogy. I
Mm-hmm.
do want to see the second and third novel of the trilogy come out.
Oh, wow. I wish you well. I look
Thank
forward
you.
to reading more of your materials. All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Ciao.